self-reflection, just a little brief idea of what that means. Then we're going to identify these other parts that we must work with in order to connect with the self. As was mentioned, I'll provide a 5-step process for self-reflection and lead you through a guided meditation to invite you into that work. We'll have some time then for some breakout discussion and for some Q&A. So let's start with that question of what is the self? And just take a moment to think about that. Think about what for you, if you just try to define that. What is the self? What does that mean? What is your core self? How do you know if you are being in your core self, if that's the person who's coming out and that's the person who's out in the world and interacting? So as we begin with this, I want to give you this sense that the core self, the self, is really the essence of who you are. And it's really more of an energy you feel. A lot of times you have that sense of being in the flow. That so often is core self. Henry Nouwen, great spiritual writer, he said this. He said, you have to trust that there is another place where you can be safe. Maybe it is wrong to think about this place as beyond emotion, passion, or feeling. Beyond could suggest that these human sentiments are absent there. Instead, try thinking about this place as the core of your being, your heart, where all human sentiments are held together in truth. From this place, you can feel, think, and act truthfully. So it's that deepest place within that we might think of as our core self. And I want to give you this sense that the self is imago Dei, right? The self is imago Dei. Imago Dei, the image of God, that we are created in the image and likeness of God. And so at that core we might think of as our imago Dei. Again, the essence of who you are, and it's going to be where you experience God. The place of encounter between God and you. And it's the place from which we then want to try to connect with others. As Jesus reminds us in the Gospel of John, he says, on that day you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I in you. He is within us. So a core self is really imago Dei. We are created in the image and likeness of God. A relational God who calls us into relationship with him, with ourselves, and with others. We are relational beings. And we really cannot come to know God, or really cannot come to know ourselves, unless we understand this fundamental concept that our God is a relational God and we are relational beings. And we're called into relationship. And one of those relationships is with ourselves. And that's our focus tonight, as we talk about those different parts inside of us we'll be dealing with. And we're going to be exploring how to connect with that deeper sense of self. Now, I posed that question to you before. How do we know if we're coming from core self? So let's look at 8 core characteristics of the self. And they're all going to be C's. Calm, curious, compassionate, clarity, confident, creative, courageous, and connectedness. These are core characteristics. When we experience that calm inside, when we can be open and curious to what someone is saying or to what's going on in the world around us, when we can be compassionate, that ear of empathy, listening to others, being with others, seeing the plight of others, when we can come from that place of clarity. A lot of times I think about that like being in the zone, right? Maybe you can think about a time in your life when you felt like everything was just flowing in the right direction. Everything, you were just in the zone and everything was going well. You were just clicking on all cylinders, right? That's that clarity. When you have that confidence in yourself, when you can be creative, right? Because when we're creative, it's like when we can strip away all those other parts that are getting in the way. and really connecting with bringing out that core self. When we're able to be courageous, and when we have that connectedness with others. We'll also know this because when we are in the space where we're coming from these qualities, then we receive the fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those will be some of the fruits of our work when we are in that space of core self. And so the goal in this work and the goal of self-reflection is really to connect to that self and to restore what we might call self-leadership, that I'm living my life coming from that place of self. Or as one of my colleagues describes it, as my spirit-led self, right? That spirit-led self, that's where I'm coming from. And so if we think about self-reflection, reflecting upon the self, this is really an inherently spiritual process. And so let's talk about the reflection side of that. So we had self, we'll talk about self-reflection. And self-reflection is really about listening. Listening. We have to be open to listen. We have to be persistent in our listening so that we can then be receiving grace through listening. I put those 3 steps in because in every spiritual journey, and this is where that second step of being persistent in listening comes in. Every spiritual journey will have some aspect of challenge to it. Disillusionment, desolation. We have these periods where we can just seem stuck. And this is where we're going to need that persistence in our listening, because so often that's where distractions come in. That's where we want to just leave it alone and go elsewhere. There's going to be some discomfort there. It's the invitation to listen so we can get to the grace. Let's think about this. There's many examples of this in the Bible. Let's think about Mary during the Annunciation, right? What happens there? The angel appears to her, right? So clearly there's an openness to listen, to perceive. But then what happens, right? The angel starts telling her what's going to happen. And the scripture says, right, she's confused, right? So she has this part, I'm confused, right? She could turn away, but she persists in listening. The angel continues to tell her that she will be carrying a child, and this child will become the son, will be the Son of God, will be the one who is there to as that Redeemer. And then what does the scripture say? She says, well, wait, no, how can this be? Right? I don't know man. Think about that, right? We can all be like that. We hear something, maybe it's even God's call, and we're like, oh, wait a minute. It's not what I was thinking, not the way I thought things were going to go. Yet that is the perfect invitation to then listen. Because then what happens? She listens more and she comes to that peace where she says, be it done unto me according to your word. Right? I'm the handmaid of the Lord. So it took her persistence in listening, in working through. And as you hear that, right, it's not simply an intellectual process. So self-reflection isn't just going to be thinking or thinking about what I'm thinking, because knowing more doesn't really change us. We need to have that full experience of listening and taking it in. Thoughts, feelings, bodily experience, whatever's going on there, and to stay with it and listen. And then it will lead us to action, because any contemplative process will involve action. I listen through this process of self-reflection, and more often than not, it's going to call me into a particular action. And when we're doing it through this process, then our best hope is that we are now coming from that place of core self. It is a genuinely intentional thing that I am going to do, rather than a reactive place where I do something that I regret later or I question or all sorts of things like that. So again, also as Paul says, right, I have to lose myself in order to gain Christ, right? I have to let go of myself in order to listen and to regain Christ. So let's talk a little bit about the other parts of ourselves, because there's the core self, but then these other parts. And I thought the best way to explain that was going to be to show you a little video. We've been seeing some animation, so I think you might like this. It's going to be very technical, so just put your thinking caps on as you follow along this next about 2-3 minute video to help us understand these different parts of ourselves.
So, how was the first day of school?
It was fine, I guess. I don't know. Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Did you guys pick up on that?
Sure did.
Something's wrong.
We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
With a nice pass over Reed, comes across center ice.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
Signal him again.
So, Riley, how was school?
You gotta be kidding me.
For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
School was great, all right?
What was that? I thought you said we were gonna act casual.
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us.
All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down.
No, not the foot.
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
Oh, I'll show you attitude, old man.
No. Breathe.
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass.
Take it to DEFCON 2.
DEFCON 2.
I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
You want a piece of this, Pops?
Yeah, well, look.
Prepare the foot.
Keys to safety position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire!
That's it. Go to your room.
The foot is down. The foot is down.
Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
Come, fly with me, gatinha.
So I wanted to show you that highly technical video to give you a sense of what I'm talking about when we talk about parts. Because when you first start talking about this language of parts, that we all have these different parts in us, people can look at you a little funny when you start using that language. Or they might think you're talking about like I have split personalities or things like that. What the video sort of humorously illustrates, and for any of you who saw the movie, right, you probably could really get a feel for what they were talking about there in the trailer. But that's that idea that within us, we have all these different parts of ourselves. Right? And our work is really to get to know these parts so that we can integrate them into a team. And that's really, if you watch the movie, what ends up happening. I don't want to give away the ending, but that's the goal, right? She's trying to work with all those parts to help them come together, right? So that then she can come from that place of self, so that she can make a good decision, so that she can be fully connected, fully calm, curious, all those attributes that we saw a little bit earlier. And so when we think about these different parts, there's a few different categories of them that I want to present for you. And I'm going to show you a little map of the soul, as I call it. Comes from a book called Boundaries for Your Soul by Kim Miller and Allison Cook. And if you haven't got it, you'll be getting a handout from tonight, and that book will be mentioned on there. And so I want to show you this little map of the soul and then talk briefly about these other parts that I'm referring to. So you see that map of the soul. And so in the middle is the self, which we talked about earlier. We're going to talk about these other parts. Down in the bottom, you see parts we'll call exiles. And then up around the top, we see parts we'll call managers and other parts we call firefighters. And the managers and the firefighters are sort of grouped together. We might call those protector parts. Exiles are going to be the vulnerable parts. The managers and firefighters are going to be the protector parts. We go into those in just a little bit more detail for you. So first, these exiles. What are exiles? Well, exiles are young, vulnerable parts that carry emotional burdens, holding on to painful memories. They carry the memories, the sensations, the emotions of this past event, and they're stuck there, right? So they carry a great burden. So examples, right? For example, I could say, I remember the day that my parents sat me down and I'm 12 years old and they're telling me that they're getting a divorce. And in that moment, there's a part of me that just froze, couldn't move, hurt by what was happening, the loss of a family, that sense of feeling powerless. And that's when being 12 years old, so this is like a 12-year-old part. And so it's often helpful that we must recognize that these parts sort of get frozen in time. And so when that freezing reaction comes in, it's connecting with that 12-year-old part inside of me. Other examples of this, we might think of any of the, what we call the big T traumas or little T traumas that we've faced, being things such as abuse or neglect, teasing, bullying, rejection, experiences of abandonment, seeing conflict, whether it's in the home or in the community, the experience of divorce. Oftentimes many subtle but persistent things that we often don't recognize, like not being valued for who you are, being more valued for what you do. And so there's these painful memories, these exiled parts that get frozen at a young age. And being at that young age, they don't know what healing looks like. They don't know what healthy behavior is. And they get stuck there. And that's where we carry a lot of that pain. And because there is so much pain that happens around that time, we develop what we call these character adaptations. Richard Rohr, another great spiritual speaker and writer, he says we develop these character adaptations as emergency solutions in early childhood as a way with coping with our environment. And at the time, these coping mechanisms were necessary for survival. But the older we grow, the more they get in the way of living as that true self. So as a result of these painful burdens the exiles experience, we develop these protector parts. And so that, and we're going to have to go into childhood to listen to those childlike parts within. Right, as Jesus said, truly I say to you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So it's going to be our invitation to connect with these parts within, parts that are often painful that we might want to avoid. And how do we avoid them? Well, there's two different protector parts I mentioned. First, we have these managers. Managers are those parts that really run our day-to-day life. And managers work to prevent the pain of the exiles from coming forth again. So to prevent us from having to feel that pain. If we think about it, what would be some good examples of this? Well, people pleasing, being a controller, self-sabotager, pessimist, avoider, perfectionist, a doer, a thinker, kind of an analytical part, maybe a taskmaster, maybe an overworker. All of these parts come in to kind of run our day-to-day life. And oftentimes we might look at these parts and think, oh, I don't like that I do this. Or we have that reaction. But our invitation is going to be to look at why these parts developed. So if I have an exile wound because I experienced a lot of trauma around having an alcoholic father. So if that was my experience, well, something I learned very quickly as a young child was it's not about what I feel. It's about making sure how he feels. I want to help him feel calm. I want to appease him and please him because the less he drinks, the less angry he gets and the calmer our home is. So it's an adaptive part that comes in, right? That emergency solution, as Rohr said, to adapt with the pain and help us survive. So these are parts that we do, again, they help us to survive. And so we want to be able to, we want to be able to recognize that part. And so often others around us love these parts, right? They may love these parts, right? Because boy, if you are just a people pleaser and a perfectionist, your supervisor will probably love you, right? Because you're going to be working really hard. If you are, just a doer and a planner and an organizer, well, perhaps your Theology on Tap planning team will love you even more because you're going to do a great job of putting those things together. So these protector parts, we don't want to get into this place where we see them as bad. They're good parts, right? They do the things that run our day-to-day life. Our goal is not to get rid of them, but really to understand how they work. And when we do that, offer them that compassion that can help them step back when we want them to, when we want that core self to emerge. Now, managers work, as I mentioned, to prevent feeling the pain of the exile. Firefighters, on the other hand, are parts that react after a painful event has occurred to extinguish the overwhelming thoughts and feelings. These are the parts that come in, again, just to put out the fire, right? Too much pain, got to get rid of it. They're often very impulsive, these parts. And so what do we think of here? We think of a lot of addictive parts, whether it's with food or with drinking, with drugging, with spending, with sexual behavior. All those addictive behaviors can come in as firefighter parts. Anger, rage, aggression can come in as a firefighter part. On the flip side of that, numbing, dissociating is another firefighter part. Perhaps even suicidal thoughts or behaviors, cutting, just getting really small, right? Things we do to try and put out the fire, to try and extinguish that pain that's coming in. And again, like managers, they're working to protect the pain. And like managers, these were adaptive parts that initially developed. Now, so often we put out these lists of firefighters and we think, oh my gosh, these are the things these are bad. We want to get rid of these. We want to get rid of these firefighter parts. And again, the irony here is our first step is going to be to embrace these parts, to offer them the care, the compassion that they'll need to be willing to step back. Now, some parts, it's good to know, some of these parts can be both protectors and firefighters. So for example, if I just come home from work every night, have a glass of wine as a way to sort of take the edge off, if you will, it's just a habit I get into. It's like a manager part, keeps me from getting too stressed out at night. On the flip side, if I have a really bad day and I just go get blitzed at the neighborhood bar, that's a firefighter part coming in, right? Just extinguish the pain. We might think of even the use of pornography in this way. Sometimes it's just used habitually as a way to numb. Other times I'm just stressed out and I go home and I find myself just doing that endless scroll online. And we can get into that even using dating apps as well. They can be used as manager parts, protector parts, more so than coming from self of really trying to connect with others. So we've got these different parts, right? These different parts we're talking about here. Again, the self, that core self, who you are, where we experience God, the exiles, those young vulnerable parts that carry the burdens, holding on to painful memories. And then those two protector parts, the managers that try and prevent the pain, the firefighters that try to extinguish the pain. And so our work here is going to be to embrace these parts in what I'll call this sort of internal sacred space.
Say hi to Aggie.
This internal sacred space where we want to invite curiosity and compassion to be able to connect with these different parts And again, important to remember, all parts are good, even though sometimes some of them get stuck in some really bad roles. And when we can connect with all of them, we can, that is what we want to do in self-reflection. And that is where we're going to provide some, that's where we also gain healing, when we are able to do that. So let's look at that 5-step process I mentioned. And then after that, I'm going to lead you through a guided meditation to help us reflect on this process. So the first thing you want to do is to focus. You want to focus on the individual part. So let's say I notice what's coming up for me is this part that really avoids. Okay, let me just take some time here. I want to go in and I really want to focus on that part. Where do I sense it in my body? Where, what are the thoughts? What are the images that even come with it? When I can connect with it, I might even see what is maybe a fear or a worry behind that part that wants to avoid things. What is it worried about? Is there a memory, a childhood memory that it connects with? And that'll help me understand perhaps how young this part really is and connect with it on that level. So when I go in and I focus, I'm really fleshing it out fully, getting in touch with it. And that second step is really how I'm doing that. I'm going to befriend it. I want to befriend it with curiosity and with compassion. Right? Those are the 2 C's I just want to pull out and highlight instead of trying to remember all 8 of them here as we do this. I want to be curious and compassionate towards this part. And I will know that if any other part shows up at this point, if I get critical, I get anxious, that's another protector part coming in. Right? That's another protector part coming in. And I might want to see if I can invite those other parts to step back so I can just stay with this first part, this avoider part, right, that I was wanting to talk about. The third, because we are human, right? Because we're human, I think it is hard for us sometimes to befriend these other parts. So here's where we can invite Jesus to draw near. We invite Jesus to draw near, to come in, to be with this part, to offer it that care, that compassion, that connection. We can invite that part to share what it wants, to unburden itself, that weariness, with him. We can invite Jesus to minister to this part as we are there too. Now, some of you may resonate more with a spirituality where you connect with the Virgin Mary, where you connect with the Holy Spirit, you connect with God the Father, you connect with angels. Wherever is your particular spirituality, you could use that resource here. I'm going to use Jesus in the meditation a little later, but just know that, again, you can draw upon any resource when you want to do that. And again, when we're doing this, we're really going in and we are connecting with these parts. And again, just to underscore the importance of that and why we can see the validity of these many parts, right? I need to listen to my anger to know that I've had a boundary violated, right? Or I've had to listen to my own loneliness to know that I need to invest in deep relationships. I need to listen to my anxiety to know that I need to feel cared for in my deepest wounds. I need to listen to my fear to know that I need to create safety. And I need to listen to my stress and irritability to know that I'm out of balance and need rest. So it's a way of understanding what's behind these adaptations, these parts that are in there, that again, so often we've thought about as things we want to get rid of. But I'm inviting you to do the opposite, to focus on them, befriend them, invite Jesus in to help us connect with them, help them unburden, and then this idea of integrating them to your internal team. And we're going to do that a little bit here in a moment with this guided meditation. And I think that'll help paint the picture of it. And after we do the guided meditation, we'll have some time for breakouts and then come back for some Q&A and be able to kind of explore this a little more further with you. So as I'm as I invite us to start preparing for the guided meditation, um, guided imagery is something that I do in my practice quite a lot. I think it's, again, such a great way to get us out of the head and just thinking about things, to being in a space where we can connect with what's going on internally in a deeper way. And so let me invite you now to just prepare yourself to move into a space so that we can do a little guided exercise. So I'll invite you just to sit back, make yourself comfortable. And as you do, I'll invite you, when you feel ready, to just close your eyes. Allow your focus to go inward. And consider these next few moments a nice gift that you will be giving yourself. And so I invite you to start by connecting in with your breath, and invite each inhale a little deeper down into the abdomen, and allowing each exhale to gently release any tension there in the body, that stress of the day. Stay with your breath, just lengthening each exhale to allow you to fully come into this more grounded space. And as you stay with your breath, turn your attention towards your thoughts, your emotions, and physical sensations. And consider if there's any part of you that's causing you some discomfort right now, or some discomfort in your life right now. So as you breathe in, take a moment to see if you can find this part in or around your body. Consider that this part is not the totality of who you are, but just one part. Welcome it. See if you can get to know it a little better. What is that part feeling? Where do you sense it in your body? Just take a moment now to focus upon it. Is there a thought or an image that comes to mind as you focus on it? See if you can cultivate curiosity and compassion toward this part. How do you feel toward this part? If you notice anything other than curiosity or compassion, notice those parts giving you these other feelings and ask them to step back, perhaps just behind a glass wall, so they can still watch what's going on right now. You may notice other parts of you jumping in that might be critical or skeptical. That's okay. Those parts are welcome. Just let them know you'll be happy to get back to them after they've given you some space for this exercise. Reconnect with the original part on which you chose to focus. Reconnect with its thoughts, feelings, and sensations until you sense your wise, spirit-led self extending that curiosity and compassion toward this part. How old or how young does this part feel to you? What is an early memory of this feeling? Honor whatever shows up for you, whatever memory, whatever feeling, continuing to offer your curiosity and compassion. Ask this part, what does it fear? Stay present as you continue to minister to this part. Does this part know Jesus? Ask the part if it would like to invite Jesus to be near. If so, invite Jesus into that scene. See that image in your mind's eye. What would the part like Jesus to know? Does it have any fears or concerns it would like to tell him? Invite it to share those things with him. Is there any burden that this part would like to give over to Jesus right now? Perhaps it may be ready, perhaps not. That's okay. Ask Jesus if there's anything he wants to say, do, or give this part in response. Just take this time to be with Jesus, remaining open, curious, and compassionate to your experience. Stay with your breath, taking a few more good deep breaths, and receive from Jesus whatever he is offering you. Then when you feel ready, welcome back the other parts perhaps that tried to jump in earlier. Invite them back in to the scene. So imagine all those parts there with you now. Perhaps you might want to envision them all sitting around the table with you sitting at the head of that table. Extend your gratitude toward each of the parts that showed up, remembering they're all good parts, even if sometimes they get stuck in some bad roles. Take another good, deep breath or two. Then whenever you feel ready, you can slowly bring your attention back into the room that you are sitting in. Another good breath or two, and then when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So just give yourself a couple of breaths as you sort of reconnect back in. And then just going to invite you now to have a few moments to be in your breakout rooms and have some discussion. There's a couple discussion questions, which I think someone on the team has ready for you. And so I'll invite whoever's doing that to feel free to invite folks into those breakout rooms.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so again, if you have any questions, if there's anything that came up, or even small group monitors, if you want to drop anything that maybe you heard come up in your small group, no names or anything specific, but anything that maybe we could dive into. And the first question that we'll start with is has to do with just being in 2020. 2020 has been an onslaught, I would say, on our protector parts. And what are some healthy habits that you could recommend, especially when we sometimes have to address these parts on a daily basis? Some of us who watch the news or are on Twitter a lot, maybe an hourly basis. So what are some recommendations you can make?
Yeah, 2020 has done a number on it. I like the way you said that, right? Our really activates those protector parts quite a bit. And I think what that's saying to us is it's that invitation to do exactly what you've invited me to talk about, that idea of self-reflection, taking some of that time out of your day to do that. So like, for example, just to help prep me for the day, There's a wonderful app called Pray As You Go. Pray As You Go is about a 10 to 15 minute reflection on a particular reading of the day, but giving you some just quiet time to kind of reflect. And so I think things like that are what we need to do. I do this online breathwork class every Monday night at 9 o'clock on Zoom. I'll have to get you the link for that one. But it's just an opportunity to kind of pause and do about 20 minutes of breath work. And what those practices do is then they invite you to then have those be a part of your day. So when you're on Twitter and that thing comes across that you're like ready to just react to, or you see that story on the news, or you see the candidate who gives you the visceral reaction, whichever candidate that might be, but you get that visceral reaction to, right? Can you step back and, because you have some of these other practices, then breathe, see if you can offer them your care, your curiosity, your compassion, right? Those are challenges. Those are some challenges. So again, build a few things in so that way then you can use them throughout your day. And exercise would be another one, because you definitely got to move the body. My dog's in great shape, I'll tell you that, because I can't go to the gym, can't play basketball. Been walking my dog more in the last 6 months than in the last 6 years.
That's great. You can teach your dog to play basketball.
That's right.
Earbud. Thanks, Jaime. He dropped in the link actually for Pray As You Go. I've done that one. That's a really great one. And
Awesome.
I don't work for Kaiser or for Calm, but I'm a Kaiser member. And for those of you who are Kaiser Permanente members, they have a free premium subscription to all members. And so you just go to Kaiser, Google Kaiser and Calm, and that's another great meditative app. And then all LA County residents, so as long as you have, I think, a zip code in LA County, you can have access to Headspace for a year too. And so those are two great meditation apps that are free, which is great during the pandemic. And besides those great resources, Teresa had a great question. She said, do you have any recordings of yourself? We will send out the TOT recordings tonight so you can play back the dulcet tones of Dr. DiPaolo, but she wants to know, do you have any recordings of yourself of meditations? Or is there a source that this comes from that you could recommend? Because it was great, and I could listen to it on like half speed as well.
Okay, you got it. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I don't yet, but I'm making a note to create some on my website, because I have like videos of previous talks on the website, which might have some meditation in there, but it's a really great idea. You know, it's funny nowadays, like in the past, you used to have to like give somebody like a CD or something. Now, because there's so many things available online, when I usually tell someone just, okay, if it's really in their body and you need like a muscle relaxation, go to YouTube, progressive muscle relaxation, or go to the specific thing you're looking for there. So I don't have any specific ones I recommend, just because so many people, like you just did, right? Oh, there's Calm, there's Headspace. It's like we find ones that speak to us.
Great, thanks. And so thanks also to Andrew. He added hallow.com as a Catholic meditation app. That's also really good. So thank you. And Sergio also added that insighttimer.com is also a great one. And so there's more links in there. When we send out the newsletter with the recording link for this, we'll make sure to incorporate a lot of these resources as well. We have another question. How can we tell if we're unburdening and integrating versus maybe just ignoring? Because sometimes it feels like we're in control when we're ignoring, but how can we tell the difference in those cases?
Yeah, good question. So if I go back to it, like, because if I'm ignoring, right, then I'm not offering that care, that compassion, or that curiosity towards the part, right? I'm doing things to move away from it. So if we think about our, spirituality and our movements, are we moving towards God? Are we moving towards this hurt part, or am I moving away from it? If I'm moving away from it, then I'm probably in that space of either ignoring it or dismissing it, minimizing it, one of those things. If I'm moving toward it, I'll also know, because I might be challenged, because I might feel some discomfort or some pain, right? That's not going to happen if I'm ignoring it. But that's okay. That's part of that journey of being able to stay with it. And it's important to know, like, if I do start to feel some pain with it, that I don't have to press and make myself feel more pain. Just pause there, right? Breathe and invite God to be there. Don't push. For example, I know in imagery sometimes when someone will connect with like a painful part, let's say they were 6 or 10 years old and they're connecting with this piece. And then it's, okay, if we invite Jesus in and the part kind of goes, I don't want anyone to come close to me. It's like, okay, let's respect that. Is the part okay if we're like sort of across the room, right? We might think I want to go in and give it a hug, but the part's like not ready for it. So again, you can also be patient as you approach the part.
That's great. Thank you. I have a spiritual director, and once she challenged me and she said, it's okay to say to God, it's I'm not ready or I'm angry. And that was something that was liberating to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I've also heard it. Sometimes I go to physical therapy, and I think a good way to think about it sometimes can be they remind you, don't go to the point of pain, go for a gentle stretch. And so, we don't have to, it's reassuring to know that we don't have to lean into the pain to try to muscle through it, on the first time, and just to sit there and then be with it for a while. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
We have another question from participant. Could you give another example of how to navigate the internal sacred space process?
I think I would always, one of the places I like to start is like I asked you to think about an area of discomfort. Other times, another way to sort of enter in is just to kind of do some breathing and go in and just connect in with your body. And just notice if you feel a little something somewhere and just pay attention to it. And you might think, oh, it's, I ate something bad for lunch. That's why I'm feeling a little buzzed down here. Okay, maybe let's just go with it anyway. Just take a moment and listen to it. See if there's anything more it wants to say. Is there any emotion there, any feeling there? And just listen and see. And so often, our body is going to be our best source to cue us that there's something more going on. So again, I can access it not just by thinking of a thought or a feeling, but going in through the body. So that's another entree point that I really like to use, especially if one of your protector parts is to be more of an intellectualizer or a thinker or just an analyst, right? Because you're going to be up in the head. And, feelings are, secondary to thoughts. So let's just go in your body and see what your body has to say, right? Sometimes I say, well, your body's going to betray you, right? You might think you have the answer, but then all of a sudden your body's acting up. Got to listen to it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I like what you said earlier about letting the parts maybe even just stand behind a back glass window.
Right.
So not to acknowledge them. I've heard someone say to say not yet, not at all, but just not yet also. And that's really great.
Yeah. Just to add to that,
mm-hmm.
I didn't do it in the meditation today, but one of the things I'll do when I'm with someone in the office is let's invite that part back in and ask if it watched what was happening. Because before, maybe it was very critical. And did it notice? Yeah, it watched what was happening and it sort of softened a little bit, right? So you're also, that part's also getting some work and it's softening that inner critic, just to give you that example. So that's why it's good. We're not sort of dismissing any part, right? And even the parts that get in the way. But yeah, behind the glass wall, but then invite them back in. See what they might have noticed.
Yeah. I felt that, I think, for myself when we did the reflection to find having compassion for one part made it easier to find compassion for another part and to be more loving there too. We have another question from a participant. How can we invite family or friends into this practice if it's something they've never experienced or aren't sure about? How do we make it approachable? And for me personally, I've had this experience, especially with our parents or with an older generation who are maybe less, experienced or open with talking about their feelings. And so how would you invite family or friends into the practice?
Yeah, that can be tough, because sometimes I will always tell folks, if you're doing this work on you, sometimes you want to go and you want to try and, like, let's say, especially a parent, you want to go back to them because now that you've sort of changed a little bit, you want to go back to them and present this new thing. But you got to remember, like, they haven't changed. So you might just re-experience the same thing that happened again. So if you had a parent who was more dismissive, even though you're all jazzed up and you go back, you might get that same reaction again, which will be re-wounding for you. So let's be careful and let's approach everybody when we're thinking about this from that place of self. So I'm going to go and I'm going to be openly, I'll be kind of maybe describing a little bit, but I just want to stay curious to what their reaction might be. And knowing that my witnessing of this is sort of the best way, right? So if you think about that, even with faith, right? So often if I try and come up and just sort of proselytize, like if I was going to do that, people tend to have that reaction to it. If my witness shows, and then I'm able to show, well, where this comes from is part of my faith. And what I do is I pray and have this connection with God, and oh, that's going to invite more curiosity than by telling someone what to do. So witness it, gently invite them into it. If it's a friend or a peer, someone younger generation that might be a little more open to going into the body, just again, describing your experience and inviting them to maybe try it with you.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I've heard it described sometimes as when you create your boundaries, and I always thought of boundaries as walls being put up or distance, but boundaries someone explained to me that it's really the things that we do to keep ourselves safe, and so they're not. It's really, I like what you said, that it's about us.
Yeah,
so thank you for that.
Yeah, and speaking just on that, Brene Brown, who many of you probably are familiar with, right? She has this wonderful line that says, some of the most compassionate people I've ever met are also the most boundaried. Right? Again, so when you think about it, like you mentioned, I think of it, maybe I thought of it as a boundary as this wall, right? And if it's a wall, I'm not going to probably be very compassionate towards the other, right? I'm having my protective wall up. But interesting, right? If I am confident, right? Core self characteristic there. If I'm confident in that boundary, then I can really listen to you and be compassionate, even if we disagree with each other. Right? That's the hardest part.
Yeah, I find that, and I don't think my mom's ever going to see this recording, but in my relationship with my mom is what I found is oftentimes is finding when I talk about myself, she finds it a safe place to listen, just listening to my self-reflection. So sometimes the best exercise we can give for family or friends can just be our own vulnerability or our own example sometimes.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I just typed in the chat, the book that those 5 steps come from, it's called Boundaries for Your Soul. I mentioned it earlier by Cook and Miller, and it's listed on your handout. But yeah, that title, right? It's Boundaries for Your Soul, creating these healthy boundaries around the different parts. Because again, we're not trying to get rid of any of them. We're integrating them in a healthy way, so we have healthy boundaries with them.
Okay, thank you. And well, yeah, we're going to definitely have that resource for you guys at the end. So if you didn't catch the title of the book, don't worry, we're going to drop it in there for you. I just want to make sure, Dr. Paolo, that we're okay on time. We have a couple of more questions from participants. Are we still good?
I'm good.
Keep going? Okay.
I'm good till midnight, so keep going.
Oh boy, and he's not billing. Take advantage. Okay, we have another question from participant. How often should we do this, and how do we prevent ourselves from avoiding it because it might be difficult?
Yeah, so think of any spiritual practice as one where we want to build in a good habit. And so if I can do a little bit every day, right? So again, if it's the praise, you go out for 10 minutes. If it's a deep breathing exercise for 10 minutes, build a little bit in every day. Something like this might be a little longer. So give yourself a little permission not to have to do like a 45-minute meditation every day. Although you can embrace that. I'm actually in about week 4 or 5 right now of doing the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. So I've been making that kind of commitment right now. But it's all about building the good habit in. So if you do a little bit every day, then every so often, you want to do a little something deeper. You can do a little something deeper like this.
Thank you. And I've also heard that it's important to be kind to yourself because it's really a muscle that you're building. And so even I had a friend, who she started the combat, and she said, I couldn't sit there and do it for 10 minutes. I said, but could you do it for 30? And then maybe the next time, like 45 seconds. And so just like any other muscle that we're building, sometimes we just need to build up that strength. So that in the times that we have to exercise the muscles that we weren't expecting, like, when you check your Twitter feed, that you've got a little bit more exercise in there.
Muscle, yeah. And I think it's important that like if it's in our prayer time or our reflective time, that if we're distracted, we still stay with the time. If I'm going to pray for 10 minutes, I'll stay there anyway, even if I get distracted. Gently invite myself back in. Gently invite myself back in. The temptation is I'm distracted. Okay, let me just make a note of this thing, right? Try not to do that. Just notice it, but then come back in that gentle way. And if it's happening repeatedly, the invitation there is, well, let me listen to that. What is that part maybe trying to tell me right now? Why is it distracting me? Is there something there? Maybe I was getting close to something vulnerable and the distractor part was keeping me away from it. Right? I know a lot of times I get distracted and I'll start to think about what I'm going to do for this next talk or what I'm going to do this, right? It gets me excited, gets me energized, right? And I notice that happens sometimes when my energy is low, right? And so if I'm in reflecting and my energy is low, one of those distractor parts is probably trying to get me excited because it doesn't want me to get sort of into this sort of passive low place. So sometimes it's good to listen to what that part might be trying to tell us.
That's a really good insight. Thank you for that. We have another question from participant. Can you say more about how others, like our family members, our culture, or an organization perhaps that we're associated with, that we work for, can take advantage of our exile parts, and how to maybe build boundaries around that too?
Yeah, no, that's great, because that certainly can happen. I mean, a lot of if growing up in our family, that was where we experienced the woundedness that those burdens that the exiles are carrying. And really what they're, if you will, kind of taking advantage of is that we have these adaptive, protector parts, right? So if my protector part, again, was like the people pleaser, intentionally or unintentionally, other people might take advantage of that, right? If I ask you to do something and you say yes every time, I'll keep asking, right? Why wouldn't I? Certainly if you're not voicing that you have a concern around that, or hey, it's getting a little too much, but you just keep saying yes and you smile, well, I'm going to think it's good and you're going to like it. So the work there is, again, it's the boundary work. I'm being aware of what's being hit inside of me. And like in that situation, that example, it's like, what does it mean for me to say no? Right? What does that mean for me? And like, what's the parts that start coming in and saying, hey, like, that's not safe to do that. Right? Don't say no, because you're probably hitting on like that exile that's saying, because if you say no, you're going to get attacked, or you're going to get something bad happening. And so you're really working with that part. And I think this is where, as people of faith, when we bring Jesus in or we bring the Virgin Mary in, that it's like we can get that strength there for Jesus to maybe be with that part where we struggle to be. And so in that sense of like Jesus being with that part, like we're there to protect you while we're saying no right now, right? Just to give that one example of it.
Thank you. That's great. And we have one more question. I think this is our last one that's been submitted. Are there firefighter parts that have that perhaps have become come out in ourselves during the distance or isolation of the pandemic that maybe we should just be on the lookout for, that maybe we haven't been in touch with or haven't been aware of?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the ways to look at that is to maybe ask if we're more introverted or extroverted, because this will be a good way to answer this. I'm more introverted by nature, and so one of those parts that could come out is like I'm getting used to it, and that part could then just keep me isolated and keep me away. And so if I more of a manager part, right? Like something's coming up, I won't do that. I don't really need to do that. I can just stay sort of in my quiet space of isolation. If I'm the extrovert, right? Now I'm really struggling with this, right? Well, then maybe I've got a firefighter part might be I just start drinking a lot. We know alcohol sales, we know marijuana sales going up. We know online dating app use going up during pandemic. Now, not all of that is bad. My wife and I have Friday night, open the bottle of wine on the patio, right? It's our thing we're doing every week. But if it was every night, might be a little too much, right? Things like that. Same with the dating apps, right? You probably know if you are using it to legitimately try to connect, or if it just becomes sort of, again, that scroll of I'm distracting myself, or almost sometimes I even call it like soft porn. You're really doing it just to look and get that excitement from looking at someone that you find attractive with really no intention of doing anything more than that. So yeah, those are some firefighter parts I think that could come in, especially during pandemic, in this, because we're alone so much.
Thank you. I'm an extreme introvert, and so I've noticed that I turn on the autoplay. I don't know if you guys have done that too, and you just keep letting the videos roll through. You talked about the dating apps. I look at food porn, which is just cooking video after cooking video, and so but you're right. Like the frequency, there's a certain amount that's good and informative and healthy, and then when you're paying attention to how much more frequent is it happening, and am I really like watching it to learn, or am I just doing it to kind of separate myself maybe from like the interactions with other people?
Right. That's a great point. Well, Heidi, we're doing pretty good for two introverts.
We are. I know. I told them, I said, I don't like being on the camera. And so this is, I'm doing this because I love you all so much. And I think like this is just such an important topic. And so we're just so grateful, Dr. DiPaolo, for you spending the time here. And well, I'm going to hand it back to our MCs. I know you might have had some questions that came up as we were talking. Again, we'll have the resources and everything in the chat, and then also in our follow-up newsletter. The recording is going to be in our newsletter link. It'll take us a little while to get it all edited, but we'll also have follow-up information if you want to get in touch with Dr. DiPaolo and ask any more questions after this. But thank you so much for this time.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and please do. You'll have the contact information for me, my email, website, anything you have individually or relationship-wise, because I do individual work, relationship work, workshops, all that kind of good stuff. So again, happy to be a resource for you.
Perfect. And we'll have that on screen in a couple of minutes.